Imagine walking into a bank, dressed sharp, ready to do business, only to be ignored and made to wait for 2 hours. Now, what if I told you the man waiting was the CEO of the entire banking company? And what happened next shocked everyone inside. This isn't just a story about waiting, it's about respect, power, and a lesson no one in that bank will ever forget. Stay tuned, because what you're about to hear will change how you see authority forever. The lobby of Pinecrest National Bank was like any other, calm, efficient, and full of routine. It was the kind of place where people came to deposit checks, apply for loans, and open accounts.
Everything ran like clockwork.
The tellers smiled politely, the receptionist answered phones without missing a beat, and the security guard leaned back in his chair with a coffee in hand, watching the door without much interest. But that Tuesday morning was different. At exactly 9:47 a.m., the glass doors opened with a soft swoosh, and in stepped a man who turned heads, not because he was loud or flashy, but because he carried himself with a presence.
À quelqu'un of power.
You know the type, someone who doesn't need to say a word to command attention. He was tall, probably in his early 40s, with smooth dark skin and a clean-shaven face. He wore a tailored navy blue suit that fit him perfectly, with polished brown leather shoes and a silver tie clip that glinted in the sunlight. On his wrist was a Rolex, subtle, not showy, but the kind that made people look twice. He walked in calmly, confidently, as if he belonged. Because he did. But not everyone saw it that way. The receptionist at the front desk barely glanced up. She was busy typing, or at least pretending to be. She noticed the man, gave him a quick once-over, then returned to her screen. "Can I help you?" she asked, without making eye contact. "Yes," the man said with a polite smile. "I'm here to see the branch manager." She raised an eyebrow, finally looking up. Her eyes scanned him again, first the suit, then the skin, and then back to the screen. Something in her expression changed. That smile people give when they think they know exactly who you are, and more importantly, who you're not. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, already reaching for her keyboard. "No," he said calmly. "But I believe he'll want to see me." She gave a short, dismissive nod. "Have a seat. It might be a while." The man nodded once, thanked her, and took a seat in the far corner of the lobby. He didn't seem upset. He didn't pull out his phone. He didn't even cross his legs or sigh loudly the way impatient people do. He just sat still, looking around the bank like he was taking it all in. 15 minutes passed. Then 30. An hour. The staff began to notice. Whispers floated from the back offices. "Who is that guy?" one teller asked. "He's been sitting there forever."
The receptionist shrugged.
"He says he doesn't have an appointment. Probably looking for a business loan or something." Another employee chuckled. "If he's just here to borrow money, he's gonna be waiting a long time. Mr. Coleman doesn't drop what he's doing for just anyone." But something about the man didn't sit right, not in a bad way, but in a curious way. He wasn't fidgeting. He wasn't frustrated. He looked calm, in control, like he knew something they didn't. At exactly 11:47 a.m., 2 hours after he first walked in, the door to the manager's office opened. Mr. Coleman stepped out, adjusting his tie and smiling as he finished a phone call. He was in his mid-50s, with graying hair, expensive glasses, and the kind of arrogance that came with years of authority. He spotted the man in the corner and made a face like he'd just been asked to clean up someone else's mess. He walked over slowly, with a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Sorry about the wait," he said, shaking the man's hand without enthusiasm.
Busy morning.
"I assume you're here for a loan application?" That's when everything started to change. When the doors of Pinecrest National Bank slid open that morning, the man who stepped through them didn't fit the usual mold. He wasn't loud. He didn't speak to anyone right away. But the moment he walked in, people noticed. Not because he tried to be noticed, but because there was something different about him.
Something commanding.
His suit was custom-tailored, navy blue with a faint pinstripe that shimmered slightly in the morning sun. The fabric hugged his shoulders perfectly, hinting at a disciplined frame beneath. He moved with a natural grace, measured, purposeful steps, like someone used to being in control of his surroundings. On his wrist was a Rolex. Not the type you'd find someone showing off at a club. No, this one was understated elegance, polished silver with a black dial.
All money still.
He wasn't trying to impress anyone. It was just a part of who he was. His shoes? Italian leather, deep brown with a mirror shine.
No scuff marks.
No creases. Every detail about him screamed preparation, discipline, and success. But despite the presentation, something else caught people's attention even more: his calm confidence. He didn't strut. He didn't smirk. He wasn't boastful. He was cool, quiet, observant. The kind of presence that makes people look twice, not because they were told to, but because they felt they should. Yet, somehow, what the staff saw wasn't elegance or power. They saw otherness. The receptionist's eyes flicked up from her monitor as he approached the front desk. Her eyebrows twitched, just slightly, but enough. The same micro-expression someone makes when they think they've already figured someone out. She saw a black man in an expensive suit, alone, and unannounced. And instead of seeing a CEO, a leader, or even a potential VIP client, she saw a question mark. He offered a polite smile.
Good morning.
I'm here to see the branch manager. She hesitated. Something about his tone caught her off guard. Too self-assured, too confident. Like he belonged there. That didn't sit right with her, though she couldn't have explained why. Do you have an appointment? She asked, eyes narrowing slightly, her fingers already reaching for the keyboard as if preparing to turn him away. No, I don't, he said, still calm. But he'll want to see me. The way he said it, there was no arrogance, no smugness, just certainty. Still, she frowned. Have a seat, she said. It might be a while. From across the room, a couple of tellers exchanged glances. Who's that? One of them whispered. No clue. Looks like he's here for a big ask or something, the other replied. Probably another guy with big dreams and no collateral, one muttered under her breath. Their judgment was casual. Automatic.
Dismissive.
Because instead of focusing on his poise, his dress, or his confidence, they focused on what they assumed he wasn't. They didn't ask his name. Didn't wonder what kind of business he had. They just decided he couldn't be important. So while he sat quietly in the corner, the staff returned to their routines, laughing behind the counter, gossiping about weekend plans, filing paperwork like nothing had changed. But everything had. They didn't know that the man sitting in that chair didn't just walk in to ask for something. He walked in to evaluate everything they were doing. He wasn't just another visitor. He was the one person they should have paid attention to. And their chance to make a good first impression was already slipping away. The man had only just approached the front desk when the receptionist glanced up, not with warmth, not with curiosity, but with the kind of look people give when they're already annoyed. A look that said, "Why are you bothering me?" before a single word was spoken. She was in her early 30s, sharp red lipstick, acrylic nails clacking softly against the keyboard, her expression carefully blank, though her eyes gave her away. She didn't recognize him, and in her mind, that meant he wasn't important. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone flat, almost bored. It wasn't really a question. It was more of a challenge. She didn't smile. She didn't stand. She didn't even turn her chair fully toward him. Instead, she tilted her head just enough to make it clear that she didn't think this conversation was going to be worth her time. The man, standing tall and composed, met her eyes with a calm smile. "Yes," he said. "I'm here to see the branch manager." Her fingers paused above the keyboard, hovering in the air. Not typing. Just hesitating. She gave him a once-over, head to toe. Again. The suit. The shoes. The watch. The confidence. But then her gaze landed on his face. And just like that, the walls went up. A second of silence passed. Then she gave a small dismissive scoff and asked, "Do you have an appointment?" with a frown tugging at her lips. There was no courtesy in her voice.
No professional politesse.
It was the tone you use when you already assume the answer is no. The man didn't flinch. "No," he replied, still steady. "But I believe he'll want to see me." His voice was smooth, sure of itself. Not aggressive.
Not arrogant. Just certain.
She raised an eyebrow and forced a tight smile, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. "Right," she said under her breath, already tapping at the keyboard like she had better things to do. "Well, he's in a meeting right now, so you'll have to wait." She didn't ask for his name. Didn't ask what his business was. Didn't even check if the manager might be available. She just pointed toward the seating area like she was directing traffic and turned back to her monitor. The man nodded once, politely, then walked over to the far corner of the lobby. He didn't look angry. He didn't argue. He simply sat down and folded his hands on his lap, legs crossed, posture straight. But he saw everything. The receptionist sighed loudly as if she'd just done something exhausting. Then she leaned back in her chair and pulled out her phone, scrolling with one hand while pretending to be busy with the other. Behind her, the staff kept working, heads down, half interested in the quiet stranger who just entered their world. One teller leaned over to whisper. He asked for the manager. No appointment. The others chuckled. The receptionist looked up again, watching him for a second before shaking her head slightly, like she just knew he didn't belong. To her, he was just another walk-in. Just another guy in a nice suit who probably wanted to talk about a big idea, or get a loan he wasn't qualified for. She had seen it before, or at least she thought she had. But this time, she hadn't seen clearly at all. Because in her rush to judge, she didn't notice that the man she just brushed off was watching everything. The staff, the service, the way they treated people who didn't come in flaunting power or privilege. And in her effort to protect the manager's time, she had no idea she'd just wasted his biggest opportunity. The moment was quiet, almost too quiet. You could hear the faint hum of the fluorescent lights, the soft clicking of keyboards, and the occasional ring of a distant phone. The receptionist, still seated behind her polished desk, stared at the man standing before her. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard, but she wasn't typing anything. She was stalling. He stood calm and relaxed, but there was something in his stillness that made people uneasy, like he knew exactly what was happening and was just waiting to see how far it would go. I'm here to see the branch manager, he repeated gently, his voice steady, clear, and perfectly calm.
Nos raised voice. Nos frustrations.
No explanation. The receptionist tilted her head, squinting just slightly like she was trying to figure out if he was serious, or just pretending to be someone important. Her lips pressed into a thin, skeptical line. And you don't have an appointment? She asked again, slower this time, like he didn't understand her the first time. No, he replied simply. But he'll want to see me. That confidence, without arrogance, caught her off guard. She blinked and looked down at her screen. Instead of checking the calendar or calling to notify the manager, she simply opened a blank document and pretended to type.
Clic, clic, pause, clic.
She scoffed quietly, then shook her head. Okay, she said finally, drawing out the word. Have a seat. It might take a while. Mr. Coleman is very busy today. It was the same line she used for people she didn't think were important. People she didn't feel like dealing with. It was her polite way of saying, you're not a priority. The man nodded, as if he'd expected it. Thank you, he said sincerely, and turned to sit down in the corner of the lobby. The receptionist leaned back in her chair with a smug expression. She glanced toward the other staff and gave a little smirk. As if she'd just won some kind of battle. As if she had put a stranger in his place. The man didn't say another word. He didn't take out his phone. He didn't ask for water. He simply sat and waited, calm, composed, and observant. Time passed slowly.
10 minutes.
Then 20. Soon, it had been over an hour. But he didn't move. The receptionist occasionally peeked over at him, surprised he hadn't left yet. Most people would have gotten frustrated, maybe even stormed out. But not him. She whispered to another employee, he's still here.
The employé glanced over.
Probably wants something big.
New business account, MEB.
Or a personal loan. The receptionist chuckled. Yeah, well, he's going to be waiting all day if he thinks Mr. Coleman just sees walk-ins. But something about the man's presence was unsettling. Not in a threatening way, just in how completely unbothered he was. Like he knew how the story would end and wasn't in any rush to reach the last page. She looked back at her screen, still not calling the manager. Still assuming this man was just another nobody. But she didn't ask his name. Didn't ask what company he was with. Didn't bother to ask why he was there. And in doing so, she made a mistake that would ripple through the entire branch by the end of the day. Because the man she had scoffed at wasn't there to apply for anything. He wasn't there for a loan, a credit card, or even an account. He was there to observe. To listen. to see how the bank treated people before they knew who they were talking to. And soon the branch manager, and the entire staff, would realize just how badly they had misjudged him. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Then 60. And still, the man remained seated, silent, calm, and composed. He sat in a sleek faux leather chair in the corner of the lobby, hands folded, posture perfect.
Not slucht. Not restle. Just waiting.
It was almost eerie how still he was. Every so often, he glanced at his Rolex, but there was no sign of frustration. Just a quiet understanding of time, how it moved, how it revealed people's true nature. Around him, the bank continued its routine. Customers came and went. Tellers smiled for the next person in line. Phones rang, papers shuffled, and staff murmured behind counters about spreadsheets, account numbers, and lunch plans. No one approached him. No one asked if he needed anything. No one checked in to offer an update.
The receptioniste?
She barely looked his way. Every so often, she peeked at him from behind her monitor, only to frown slightly when she saw he was still there. Why hasn't he left yet? She didn't get it. Most people, after sitting ignored for over half an hour, would have walked out or demanded answers. But he didn't. He just sat there, legs crossed, gaze steady, like he was reading the room more than the clock. The tension wasn't loud, but it was building. People noticed. A woman sitting 2 chairs over glanced at him, then at the receptionist, and back again. She leaned in a little, as if about to say something, but the man offered a small nod that gently dismissed her concern. He wasn't bothered. And that only made people more curious. "Hey, who is that guy?" one of the junior associates asked quietly while refilling the printer paper.
No clue, whisperait de Nazer.
He asked for Mr. Coleman without an appointment. The first one snorted. Well, good luck with that. Laughter. Dismissal. But still, curiosity. Another 15 minutes passed. Now it had been over an hour and a half. The man shifted slightly in his seat, stretched his fingers, then returned to his calm posture. The receptionist looked again. Something about his patience was beginning to bother her. It was unnatural. People weren't this still. People didn't wait this long without getting upset. Why wasn't he upset? She tapped her pen on the desk. Then sighed. Maybe he was one of those silent type executives. The ones who didn't make a fuss but remembered everything. Or maybe he was just stubborn. Either way, she didn't feel like checking with Mr. Coleman. Not yet. In her mind, she still didn't believe this man was important. After all, if he were someone really powerful, wouldn't he have scheduled a meeting? Called ahead? Had someone announce him? But the man had done none of that. He had simply shown up and waited. Another 10 minutes passed. Now people were beginning to wonder if this was some sort of secret inspection. Or maybe a corporate plant sent to test the staff. The idea made some of them nervous, but they didn't voice it. Not yet. And still, the man said nothing. Not a complaint. Not a question. Just that same patient, quiet confidence, like he was giving them a chance. The clock ticked on. It had now been 2 full hours since he walked through the glass doors of Pinecrest National Bank. 2 full hours since he politely asked to see the branch manager. 2 full hours of being dismissed, ignored, and underestimated. And yet, he stayed. Because he wasn't just waiting for the manager. He was waiting for the moment when everything would change. The second hour had come and gone. Yet the man still hadn't moved. He sat in the exact same position, legs crossed, back straight, hands resting lightly in his lap. Calm. Collected. Watching. Waiting. And that's when the whispers started. "Who does he think he is?" one teller muttered behind the glass divider, glancing toward the man with narrowed eyes. Her colleague leaned closer. "I heard he walked in asking for Mr. Coleman. No appointment." No appointment? And he expects to get seen just like that? Seriously, another chimed in. The nerve. The 3 of them chuckled, but their laughter was uneasy, like they weren't quite sure if they should be laughing. Something about the man's presence had started to shift the mood. He wasn't rude. He wasn't loud. But he was making people nervous. Because even without speaking, he had become the center of the room. The receptionist, still pretending to be busy at her desk, tapped her pen against her notepad and muttered, "I don't get it. Why would someone just sit for 2 hours like that? A junior staffer walked by and shrugged. Maybe he's a mystery shopper or something. You know, sent by corporate to evaluate service? Could be, she replied, suddenly unsure. But then why wouldn't he say anything? Exactly. It's weird. They looked over at him again.
Sti motion. Sti waiting.
A silence passed. Then the whispers began again, only now they carried a different tone.
Les smoking.
More cautious. You think he's a lawyer?
Na.
Maybe a business investor? What if he's from corporate? That one made the group go quiet for a second. If he was from corporate, if he was an auditor or someone with authority, then all the brushing off, all the snickering, all the dismissive glances, would come back to bite them. But still, no one checked on him. No one offered him a drink. No one called upstairs to Mr. Coleman to say, "Hey, someone's been waiting 2 hours." Because no one wanted to admit they might have made a mistake. Especially not the receptionist, who had been the first to dismiss him entirely. She pulled her phone from under the desk and quietly opened the branch directory. Scrolled through the names. Looked again at the man's face. No match. Still, something about him felt important. His suit wasn't off the rack. His shoes were custom leather. And that watch? Easily 5 figures. He wasn't flashy, but he was clearly someone. And the way he held himself, shoulders square, gaze calm, unbothered by time, it screamed of discipline, authority, power.
The whisper grêle des behind closed doors.
I bet Mr. Coleman has no idea he's down there. Maybe we should tell him? No way, one of the senior clerks said. It'll look bad if we let this go on, and he's someone important. Well, it already is bad, another whispered. He's been sitting here for 2 hours. And still, no one moved. The man remained a mystery. Was he waiting for a meeting? Was he an investor? Was he testing them?
Nobody knew.
But what they all did know was this: whatever was about to happen, it wasn't going to be small. Because people don't sit patiently for 2 hours unless they already know what the outcome will be. And deep down, the staff were starting to realize the truth they didn't want to admit. They hadn't just ignored a customer. They may have ignored the most important person to walk through that door all year. And he was still waiting. Exactly 2 hours and 14 minutes after the man first walked through the doors, the heavy frosted glass office door upstairs clicked open.
Out stepped Monsieur Coleman. Branch manager.
Early 50s. Slicked back silver hair. Navy pinstripe suit with just a hint of shine. Every step he took radiated self-importance. He adjusted his gold cufflinks as he walked, as if preparing for a photo shoot instead of a meeting. Behind him, a junior assistant trailed with a tablet, listing off numbers and memos.
Monsieur Coleman wasn't listening.
His eyes were scanning the floor below. The assistant pointed. That's the guy who's been waiting. Mr. Coleman raised an eyebrow.
The one in the corner.
Yes, sir.
Esquinted.
The man still sat patiently. Still calm. Unbothered. Not on his phone.
Not talking. Just waiting.
Coleman glanced at the receptionist and frowned. Why wasn't I told someone was waiting for me?
The receptionist stammered.
He didn't have an appointment, sir. I didn't know he was. Coleman cut her off with a wave of his hand and adjusted his jacket. Always check with me, he muttered. We don't ignore potential business. Then he put on his customer face, the one that screamed fake warmth and corporate charm. He descended the stairs with deliberate slowness, every footstep echoing just enough to get attention. The lobby quieted. Whispers ceased. All eyes turned toward Mr. Coleman. He approached the seated man and cleared his throat. Good afternoon, he said, flashing a well-practiced smile. I hear you've been waiting to see me. My apologies for the delay. My team didn't pass along the message. The man looked up slowly and met his eyes. No anger. No sarcasm.
Just apolite, steady gaz.
I understand, the man replied.
You rebusi. Monsieur Coleman extended a hand. Brian Coleman. Branch manager. And you are?
The man took his hand, firm but calm.
David Ellison.
There was a pause. The name didn't click immediately for Coleman. But it would.
Oh, well, Monsieur Ellison, Why don't we head to my office?
I'd be happy to hear what brings you in today. David stood, buttoned his suit jacket, and nodded once.
Lead the way.
The entire staff watched as the two men walked side by side up the stairs. Silent. Tense. Like something important was about to happen, but no one knew what. As they disappeared into the office, the whispers exploded again. Did you hear his name?
David Ellison?
Why does that sound familiar?
Ouais, à second.
I think he's someone big, but it was too late. The doors to the office closed with a gentle click, and the truth of who David Ellison really was would soon unravel everything. Because what no one downstairs knew, what even Mr. Coleman hadn't realized yet, was that David wasn't there for a loan. He wasn't there to open an account or make a deposit. David Ellison was the CEO of Ellison Capital, a multimillion-dollar investment firm known for acquiring and evaluating financial institutions. And today? He had come to Pinecrest National Bank for one reason: to observe. And everything that had happened, from the dismissive receptionist to the whispers, to the 2-hour wait, was part of the test. A test the branch was already failing. The office door clicked shut behind them with a soft thud that somehow felt louder than it should have.
The glass windows let in just enough light to frame the room in a gentle, professional glow.
Everything inside was pristine: mahogany desk, polished plaques on the wall, awards, and a framed photo of Mr. Coleman shaking hands with a city councilman. David Ellison took in the room with a single casual glance. Mr. Coleman, however, wasted no time. He walked briskly to his desk, gesturing toward the guest chair with a slight smirk.
Please have a seat, Monsieur Ellison. David sat without a word.
Calm. Collected. Still not showing any hint of irritation. Mr. Coleman sat across from him, lacing his fingers on the desk, flashing the kind of customer service smile that could be taught in a training manual. Apologies for the wait, he said, voice silky but shallow. I was tied up with a few important clients this morning. You understand how that goes. There it was, the smirk. It wasn't overt, but it carried weight. As if to say, you're probably just here to ask for a loan, maybe open a small account.
Nothing urgent. Just another walk-in.
Another nameless face in a suit. David tilted his head slightly. Yes, he replied coolly, I do understand exactly how that goes. But his voice lacked sarcasm. It was unervingly neutral. Unreadable. Coleman didn't notice. Or if he did, he ignored it. He leaned back in his chair, still maintaining that smile. So, Mr. Ellison, what brings you to Pinecrest National? Business banking needs?
Portfolio consultation?
I'd be happy to connect you with one of our associates after this. David calmly set his phone face down on the desk. Actually, I came to speak with you directly. Oh. Coleman raised an eyebrow, feigning interest. Well, I do appreciate the personal touch, but I hope you understand. We generally handle high-level consultations through appointments only. Walk-ins are unusual.
Another smile.
Another jab, subtle but clear. David didn't flinch. Yes, I'm aware. Mr. Coleman's smile began to waver just a little. He shifted in his chair.
So, tell me what you're looking for, Monsieur Ellison.
How can I help? There was a short pause. Then David leaned forward slightly, his eyes locked on Coleman's. I was actually hoping to help you.
Monsieur Coleman blinked.
I'm sorry. David reached into his inner coat pocket and pulled out a slim, matte black folder. He placed it neatly on the desk and slid it forward. Coleman opened it. His expression shifted. Inside was a letter, official, embossed, and printed on heavyweight paper.
At the top, Ellison Capital Group.
It only took 3 lines of reading before Mr. Coleman's fingers tightened on the edges. We've been quietly evaluating several regional banks for acquisition, David explained, voice still calm. Yours was on the short list. Mr. Coleman looked up slowly, now pale. I didn't. I wasn't told about any evaluations. No, David replied. That was intentional. The room went silent. Gone was the smirk. Gone was the condescending tone. Coleman suddenly realized that the man he had kept waiting for 2 hours, dismissed, underestimated, and barely acknowledged, wasn't just anyone. He was the CEO of the very firm that might soon own the branch.
And Coleman?
He had just treated his potential boss like an inconvenience. David leaned back, crossed his legs, and said quietly, "Now, Mr. Coleman, would you still say you were busy with important clients? Or did you just miss the most important one of the year?" The air in the room shifted. What started as a subtle tension now felt like a taut wire stretched to its limit, ready to snap. Mr. Coleman, still trying to recover from the shock of the letter, masked his unease with a thin smile. But the eyes, the ones that once held arrogance, now flickered with a mix of doubt and curiosity. He leaned forward, hands flat on the polished desk, and said with a voice dripping in assumption, "So, I assume you're here for a loan application?" It wasn't a question. It was a statement dressed up as one. He didn't really want to know. He'd already made up his mind. David Ellison remained calm, unshaken by the tone. There was no anger, no indignation. Just a quiet confidence that seemed to fill the room, pushing back against Coleman's forced bravado. "No," David replied evenly, "I'm not here for a loan." Coleman blinked, surprised but quick to cover it up. "Well then, what else could it be?" he asked, trying to keep his voice light but failing to hide the edge beneath.
Business consultation? Investment advice?
Opening a new account?
David shook his head slowly.
Neither. The pause that followed felt heavy. Coleman's eyes narrowed slightly. "Then, what exactly are you here for?" David leaned back in his chair, folding his hands on his lap. "To discuss the future of this branch." That simple phrase hit the room like a thunderclap. Coleman's jaw tightened.
The future?
"What do you mean?" David's gaze didn't waver. "Ellison Capital is considering acquiring Pinecrest National Bank. We're evaluating leadership, operations, and overall performance." The branch manager's forced composure faltered just a little. He swallowed and adjusted his tie. "So you're saying this visit, this wait, was part of your evaluation?" David nodded. "Yes. Every interaction, every response, every moment of this visit is part of the assessment." Coleman's mind raced. The dismissive attitude he'd shown earlier suddenly seemed reckless, even foolish. 2 hours. That's how long David had been waiting, patiently, silently, while Coleman prioritized other important clients. Suddenly, Coleman felt the weight of every neglected glance, every whispered insult from his staff, and every moment of invisibility David had endured. "You see," David continued, "leadership is about respect. Respect for your clients, respect for your team, and respect for those who seek your time." Coleman opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. David pressed on, "Waiting 2 hours without a word is not just poor customer service, it's a statement. And in business, statements matter." Coleman's shoulders slumped slightly. The confident branch manager was losing his veneer, and David's quiet authority filled the room. "And what about the whispers?" David asked softly. "The ones that questioned my right to be here? The ones that dismissed me before they even knew who I was?" The question hung in the air, heavy and uncomfortable. Coleman looked away, ashamed. David smiled faintly, not in mockery, but with understanding. "It's human nature," he said. "But leaders must rise above it." The room was silent, save for the ticking of the clock. Coleman finally nodded.
You've made your point.
David stood and extended his hand. "I hope this conversation changes more than just your perspective. I hope it changes the culture here." Coleman hesitated for a moment before shaking the offered hand. As David left the office that day, the message was clear: respect is earned not just by titles or suits, but by how you treat every person who walks through your door. And if you don't understand that,
You might just lose everything.
Mr. Coleman's confident assumption hung in the air like a heavy fog. "I assume you're here for a loan application," he said, voice dripping with that practiced, condescending tone. But David Ellison didn't flinch.
No hésitation.
No sign of offense. Instead, he met the branch manager's gaze with steady eyes, a calm that seemed to silence the entire room. "No," David said, his voice low but unmistakably powerful. "I'm not here to apply for anything." Coleman's lips twitched, as if he wanted to dismiss the response but knew better than to interrupt. David continued, voice steady, deliberate. "I'm here to discuss your future."
Those words landed like a thunderclap.
The branch manager leaned back, trying to hide the flicker of surprise that crossed his face. The boldness of the statement, coming from a man he'd ignored for over 2 hours, was unexpected.
Your futur.
Coleman echoed, a bit guarded. David nodded once. Yes. The future of this branch, this team, this entire operation. For a moment, the room was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. Then David leaned forward, hands resting lightly on the desk. Mr. Coleman, he said, I'm the CEO of Ellison Capital Group. We're a firm that specializes in acquiring and revitalizing banks like Pinecrest National. Coleman's eyes widened, but his face stayed neutral. We've been observing this branch for months, David went on, and today's visit is part of a larger evaluation. Coleman swallowed, trying to maintain his composure. David's calm tone made his words cut sharper than any raised voice could. Your staff's behavior, the service provided, or lack thereof, and most importantly, how you personally treat those who walk through your doors, all factor into whether this branch remains independent or becomes part of our portfolio. Coleman's confident facade was cracking. David continued, 2 hours. That's how long I waited. He paused.
Waiting in your lobby.
Ignored. Assumed to be unimportant. Coleman shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I could have walked out, David said quietly, but I stayed. To see what leadership looks like here.
The branch manageress face flushed slightly.
David looked directly at him. This isn't just about a customer service failure. It's a failure of leadership. Coleman's silence was telling. David softened his tone just a little. But it's not too late. He leaned in. We're prepared to invest in this bank. But with one condition, leadership that values respect, integrity, and the dignity of every person. Coleman nodded slowly, finally grasping the gravity of the moment. David stood and offered his hand. I hope this conversation is the beginning of a new chapter for Pinecrest. Coleman hesitated but shook the hand. As David left the room, the message was clear. Power isn't just about titles or money. It's about how you treat others. And sometimes, the quietest words can be the most powerful. The moment David Ellison said he was here to discuss Mr. Coleman's future, the branch manager chuckled. It was a laugh filled with disbelief, like someone hearing a joke that wasn't really funny. Mr. Coleman shook his head, leaning back in his chair with a smirk that screamed, "Who does this guy think he is?" "What do you mean, discuss my future?" he asked, voice heavy with sarcasm. He paused, folding his hands on the polished desk. "Who are you, exactly?" His tone wasn't curious, it was dismissive. Like David was a fly buzzing in his office.
David met the smirk with calm eyes, steady and unwavering.
I'm David Ellison, he said simply. CEO of Ellison Capital Group. The name alone didn't faze Coleman at first. He still thought this was some small-time visitor. Coleman's laugh returned, low and doubtful.
CEO?
Of what exactly? Some small investment firm? David's expression didn't change.
No ego.
No need to boast. Ellison Capital Group was far from small. It was one of the fastest-growing private investment firms in the country, specializing in banking acquisitions. But David knew bragging wouldn't help. Instead, he laid out the facts. We specialize in revitalizing underperforming banks, David said evenly. Pinecrest National Bank is on our radar. Mr. Coleman blinked, finally beginning to understand. You mean you're here to buy us out? David nodded. In a manner of speaking. Coleman's smirk faded as reality started to sink in. David continued, I'm here because leadership matters. How a branch treats its clients, how it treats visitors, that tells me everything about its future.
Monsieur Coleman scoffed.
So you're judging me based on how long it took me to see you?
The way you endured in our lobby?
Yes, David replied simply.
And more.
He leaned forward, voice steady but firm. 2 hours is more than a wait. It's a message. Coleman's face reddened, his confidence wavering.
David précédent.
It's a message about priorities. About respect. Coleman shifted uncomfortably. Listen, Mr. Ellison, he said, voice lower now, running a bank isn't easy. There are procedures, appointments, schedules. You can't just waltz in expecting instant service. David nodded. I understand that. But good leadership isn't about excuses. It's about making people feel valued. even those without appointments, even those who might be overlooked. Coleman swallowed hard. David continued, "That's why I'm here. To see if this branch is ready for the future. If it's ready to grow. Or if it's destined to fall behind." The branch manager was silent. Finally, he asked, "And if I fail this test?" David gave a small, knowing smile. "Then you risk losing your position. And the branch may no longer be yours to lead."
The wordenie vit in the air.
Mr. Coleman stared at David, no longer laughing. The room was quiet except for the ticking clock. David stood, gathering his folder. "I came to discuss your future," he repeated, calm but powerful. "And now you know why." As David walked out, the branch manager sat back, the weight of what had just happened settling in. The confident, dismissive smirk was gone. In its place was the dawning realization: this was no ordinary visitor. This was a man who held their fate in his hands. The moment David Ellison reached into his inner jacket pocket, the entire lobby seemed to pause. The quiet hum of printers and low murmurs of bank customers faded into nothing. Even the faint rustling of papers stopped. With a slow, deliberate motion, David pulled out a sleek business card. It wasn't just any card. It was heavy matte black with embossed silver letters that shimmered under the lobby's bright lights. He held it out, an unspoken challenge and statement all at once. Everyone in the room stopped what they were doing and turned their attention to him. The receptionist, who had barely glanced his way before, froze mid-typing. The tellers who had whispered about him earlier ceased their gossip, eyes wide. Even a few customers in the waiting area sat upright, sensing something important was unfolding. David's calm presence filled the space. He didn't speak yet. No dramatic words. Just the silent power of the card in his hand. Finally, he placed it on the counter in front of the receptionist. She picked it up hesitantly. The room remained silent. Slowly, she read aloud, "David Ellison, CEO, Ellison Capital Group." Her voice trembled slightly. "CEO?" Another teller whispered behind her. A murmur started to build, but before it grew, David raised a hand. "Please," he said softly but firmly, "I'm not here for small talk or casual visits." The lobby settled immediately. David looked directly at the receptionist. "I came here today to meet the branch manager." Her eyes flicked to the card again, then up at him. "Yes, I understand," she said, her tone now respectful. David nodded and turned toward the office door where Mr. Coleman had just appeared. The bank manager's face had changed since their meeting began. Gone was the confident, dismissive attitude. Now it was replaced by something more measured, cautious. David's presence had shifted the atmosphere in the entire bank. The customers stopped murmuring. The staff straightened in their seats and behind their counters. Everyone was watching. David took a deep breath and spoke. "I'm here to evaluate this branch for a possible acquisition by Ellison Capital Group." His words hung in the air like a striking bell. The reception area, once buzzing with low chatter, was now completely silent. The bank employees exchanged glances. Whispers of acquisition and Ellison Capital floated quietly among the staff. A young teller, who had been skeptical earlier, muttered under her breath, "That explains the 2-hour wait." David continued, "Leadership is not just about managing accounts or processing transactions. It's about respect and service." He looked toward the staff, his gaze steady and purposeful. "This branch is on the brink of change. And it starts with how you treat every person who walks in the door." At that moment, the receptionist placed the card carefully in a glass holder on the counter, an unspoken sign of recognition and respect. David's simple act of handing over his business card had shifted the entire dynamic. No longer was he just a man in a suit waiting quietly. He was now the powerful CEO with the authority to decide the future of the bank, and of the people who worked there. And with that realization, the room remained silent, heavy with anticipation. Because everyone knew one thing for certain: this wasn't just a visit. It was a turning point. David Ellison's hand moved slowly, deliberately, as he reached into his inner jacket pocket once more. But this time, the card he pulled out wasn't his own. With quiet authority, he placed the business card face up on the branch manager's desk. The room, already heavy with tension, seemed to hold its breath. The card bore a different name: Elijah Grant, CEO, Meridian Financial Group. Mr. Coleman's eyes locked onto the card. His mouth opened slightly, But no words came out immediately. The significance was clear. Ellison Capital Group wasn't the only player in the game. Meridian Financial Group was one of the most powerful financial institutions in the region, known for aggressive acquisitions and a reputation for shaking up the banking industry. David's calm, measured delivery made it clear this wasn't a bluff. "Mr. Coleman," David said softly, "this card represents another path." He gestured to the card. Meridian Financial Group is considering an offer to acquire Pinecrest National Bank as well. But they've made it clear that leadership must change. The room felt even heavier now. David's voice remained steady, but each word carried the weight of a challenge. "This is your chance to prove that you are the right person to lead this branch into a new future." Mr. Coleman's confident mask cracked. He glanced at the card again, then back up at David. "So you're saying I'm on notice?" Coleman said finally, voice low. David nodded. "You're on notice," he confirmed. The stakes had never been higher. This was more than a business transaction. It was a test of leadership, respect, and vision. David continued, "Ellison Capital and Meridian Financial are both watching closely. Whoever proves worthy will lead Pinecrest National into a new era." Coleman's jaw tightened. He knew this wasn't just about numbers on a balance sheet. It was about trust, trust from the community, trust from the staff, and trust from the people who walked into the bank every day. David stood, folding his hands calmly. "Your future depends on how you respond from this moment forward." The branch manager swallowed, then nodded. As David turned to leave, the card remained on the desk, face up, a silent reminder of the challenge ahead. The lobby was still silent when David walked out. Employees exchanged looks. Customers whispered. Everyone sensed something was changing. The question now wasn't just who would buy the bank. It was who deserved to lead it. The moment David Ellison placed Elijah Grant's business card on the desk, something shifted in the room. Mr. Coleman's eyes locked onto the card and then quickly shifted away, a flicker of fear flashing across his face. The color seemed to drain from his cheeks. His usual confident posture faltered for just a moment. Meridian Financial Group, one of the largest and most influential banking corporations in the entire state, owned dozens of smaller banks. And yes, Pinecrest National Bank was one of them. That meant Coleman wasn't just dealing with a potential buyer or investor. He was facing a corporate giant with deep pockets, far-reaching influence, and a reputation for ruthless efficiency. The weight of that truth hit Coleman hard. Ellison's calm words echoed in the room. Meridian Financial Group is considering an offer to acquire Pinecrest National. Those words carried a quiet power, but the implication was enormous. If Meridian decided to step in, Coleman's control over this branch could vanish overnight. He might even lose his job. The stakes were higher than anyone had realized. Coleman's mind raced. For years, he had operated this branch with a level of control and complacency. But now, the rules had changed. David Ellison's presence was a warning and a promise. Meridian wasn't just a faceless corporation. They demanded leadership that inspired respect and delivered results. Leaders who didn't just run a branch, but who uplifted their teams and customers alike. Coleman swallowed hard, the taste of uncertainty bitter on his tongue. He glanced around the room. The staff and customers were watching him closely. Ellison had already won half the battle by showing that real power wasn't in a title or a suit. It was in respect. The manager forced himself to straighten, to put on a brave face, but inside, a storm was brewing. He realized that if he wanted to keep his position, he needed to change. Fast. Because now, he was not just competing with David Ellison. He was competing with an entire financial empire. And that empire did not tolerate failure. Ellison's words came back to him like a challenge. "This is your chance to prove you're the right person to lead." The silence in the room deepened as Coleman's eyes locked once more on Elijah Grant's business card. The weight of the moment was clear. One misstep could cost him everything. For the first time, the manager understood that leadership wasn't about power or control. It was about trust. About how you treat people. How you listen. How you show respect. And most importantly, how you lead by example. Coleman sat back down, his mind racing with plans, promises, and the reality of the challenge ahead. The blood may have drained from his face, but inside, determination was beginning to burn. This was his moment. The moment that would define not just his career, but the future of Pinecrest National Bank itself. David Ellison stood tall, his eyes scanning the entire branch. The once buzzing bank lobby had turned into a quiet, expectant room. Everyone, staff, customers, and even the branch manager, was watching him, waiting for what would come next. With a calm, confident tone, David spoke clearly, "I'm here for a surprise audit."
The warden in the air like a thunderclap.
The receptionist's fingers froze over the keyboard. The tellers exchanged uneasy glances. Even Mr. Coleman's composed expression faltered for a moment.
A surprise audit?
That meant David was here to dig deeper than just numbers on a report or the polished speeches that often accompanied official visits. He was here to see how the branch operated when the staff didn't know the boss was watching. David continued, "I like to see how our branches operate when they don't know the boss is coming." It was a simple philosophy, but powerful. Because true leadership and integrity show in the everyday moments, not just when a manager is present, or during scheduled inspections. The staff shifted uncomfortably. Some glanced nervously at each other, others fidgeted behind their counters. David's words made it clear, nothing was off limits. He was here to observe the real culture, the good, the bad, and everything in between. Mr. Coleman's jaw tightened. This wasn't just an audit of finances or paperwork. It was an audit of respect, service, and leadership. David walked slowly through the lobby, watching every interaction. He noticed how the receptionist responded to questions. Was it with patience or irritation? How did the tellers treat customers? Were they friendly or rushed? He observed the body language of the staff. Did they look motivated or discouraged? Did the branch feel like a place people wanted to work or just a job they had to do? David's presence was quiet but impactful. His surprise audit wasn't just about checking boxes. It was about measuring the soul of the branch. At one point, a nervous teller accidentally dropped a stack of deposit slips. David smiled gently and helped pick them up. That small act showed the teller that leadership wasn't about intimidation. It was about support. The employees began to relax slightly, realizing David wasn't there to catch them out. He was there to understand them. When he returned to the manager's office, he looked directly at Coleman. "Leadership starts with respect," David said firmly. "And respect starts with how you treat every single person, staff and customer alike." Coleman nodded, the weight of the words sinking in. David then addressed the entire branch staff, who had gathered quietly nearby. "This surprise audit is not about punishment," he said. "It's about improvement."
About growing together.
He paused, letting the message settle. Because the future of Pinecrest National depends on the culture you create.
The lobby slowly came back to life.
Staff exchanged hopeful looks. Customers smiled and went back to their business. David's surprise audit wasn't just a test. It was an invitation to change, to lead with integrity and heart. And with that, David Ellison turned and walked out of the branch, leaving behind a silent promise. The future was in their hands.
A David Ellison's word echoed through the branch, a sudden shift rippled across the room.
The employees, those who had earlier whispered and ignored him, suddenly froze in place. Their confident postures stiffened, smiles vanished, and the easy chatter dissolved into nervous silence. It was as if a cold breeze had swept through the room, chilling every bone. Eyes widened with shock. Mouths dropped open, unable to form words. Several staff members wiped beads of sweat from their brows, their breaths catching in their throats. No one expected the CEO of a powerful financial group to walk into their branch unannounced. Least of all to declare a surprise audit that would expose every weakness, every corner cut, and every attitude hidden behind closed doors. For months, some employees had treated this branch like a routine job, checking out customers mechanically, ignoring complaints, and brushing off important details. But now, with David standing in front of them, everything felt different. He wasn't just another visitor. He was the boss. The kind of boss whose decisions could shape their careers, their futures. The atmosphere thickened with tension. A teller who had earlier been chatting casually suddenly straightened her back and forced a tight smile. Another employee clutched a clipboard so tightly her knuckles turned white. Even the usually calm receptionist sat upright, her fingers trembling slightly over the keyboard.
David's calme de Méanor only intensifiait the pressure.
He wasn't angry. He wasn't shouting. He simply watched. His eyes, steady, observant, and unyielding, seemed to pierce through the staff's facades. One by one, the employees felt exposed. Their mistakes, their shortcuts, their careless moments suddenly felt impossible to hide. The silence was broken only by the soft clicking of keyboards and the occasional rustle of paper. David walked slowly through the bank, nodding slightly when he noticed a teller patiently helping an elderly customer, but frowning when he saw another employee rushing through a transaction. His surprise audit wasn't just a test of numbers. It was a test of character. The staff realized that their everyday actions were being watched and judged. It was clear that this wasn't going to be an ordinary visit. After what felt like an eternity, David stopped in front of the branch manager's office and turned around. He locked eyes with the employees. "You have a choice," he said simply. "You can either rise to the occasion and show what you're truly capable of, or continue down a path that will only lead to failure." His words hit like a cold splash of water. The employees swallowed hard. The reality was unmistakable. The future of this branch, and their jobs, was on the line. Suddenly, a quiet murmur began. It started with one teller. "I think we can do better," she said, her voice shaking but sincere. Another chimed in, "Yeah, we want to do better." Slowly, the tension began to ease. The frozen expressions softened. The staff straightened up, ready to face the challenge head-on. David nodded approvingly. He wasn't just there to expose faults. He was there to inspire change. The employees understood now. This surprise audit was an opportunity, a chance to rebuild trust, improve service, and prove their worth. And deep down, despite the fear, they felt a spark of hope. Because this moment, terrifying as it was, could be the beginning of something better.
David Ellison's voice cut through the tense silence like a knife.
"You made me wait 2 hours," he said, his eyes locking onto Mr. Coleman's. The branch manager shifted uncomfortably in his chair. His carefully crafted composure was starting to crumble. David didn't look angry, but there was something far more powerful in his tone, calm authority. 2 hours, David repeated, letting the words sink in. The room seemed to shrink around them. Everyone felt the weight of those 2 hours, time wasted, respect denied. David's gaze sharpened. "And you assumed I was here for a loan." Mr. Coleman blinked, surprised by the directness.
Why?
David asked, his voice steady but firm.
The question unheavy, demanding honesty.
Coleman struggled to find an answer. Why did he assume that a sharply dressed, calm, confident black man walking into his bank was there to apply for a loan? Was it the suit? The Rolex?
The calme de Méanor?
No, it was something deeper.
A silent, on spoke en bias.
David's question wasn't just about the 2-hour wait or the wrong assumption. It was about respect. About fairness. About the small but powerful ways prejudice still operated in places where it shouldn't exist. Coleman swallowed, his cheeks flushing. "I guess I made a mistake," he finally admitted, his voice low. David nodded. "That's an honest start." "But it's not just about mistakes," David said, his tone softening slightly. "It's about recognizing when those mistakes come from something bigger, assumptions based on who I am, not what I represent." The staff shifted uncomfortably. Some looked down at their shoes. Others glanced at each other, realizing the truth in David's words. He wasn't angry. He was making a point, a lesson in dignity and equality. David continued, "When you make someone wait for 2 hours without explanation, you're telling them they don't matter. And when you assume they're here for a loan, just because of how they look, you're telling them you don't respect their position." He paused. "I'm not here for a loan. I'm here to challenge the way this branch operates. To hold leadership accountable. To build a better future, for the bank and for everyone it serves." The room was silent again, but this time, it was different. It was thoughtful. Reflective. David's words had opened a door, a chance to confront uncomfortable truths. Mr. Coleman looked up, meeting David's steady gaze. "I understand," he said quietly. "I realize now that respect isn't just about titles or suits. It's about how we treat every person who walks through that door." David smiled slightly.
D'etes olive verwanted.
"And it's why I'm here." For a moment, the tension lifted. The employees exchanged looks, some hopeful, others determined. Because change was possible. It had to be. David's challenge wasn't just to the branch manager. It was to every person in that room. To reconsider their assumptions.
To be better.
To lead with respect. And that day, in that quiet bank lobby, something began to shift.
À laissons lire Ned.
A respect earned.
A future waiting to be built.
Mr. Coleman's usual confidence was nowhere to be found. His face reddened as he struggled to find the right words. He cleared his throat, and for the first time since the tense encounter began, he seemed genuinely unsettled. I didn't mean any offense, he started, voice wavering slightly. We just weren't expecting someone like you. The words hung awkwardly in the air, unspoken but clear to everyone present.
Someone like me.
David Ellison's voice was calm but firm, inviting Coleman to explain further. Coleman swallowed hard, realizing the weight of his own words. The unspoken message was painfully clear. David's presence challenged the branch manager's expectations and assumptions. He fumbled for a way to soften what he had just said, but the damage was done. We weren't expecting a black CEO to walk through those doors, Coleman admitted quietly, his eyes avoiding David's steady gaze.
A ripple of discomfort spread through the staff.
Some looked down, ashamed. Others glanced around, suddenly aware of how outdated and unfair their biases might be. David's expression didn't harden. Instead, it softened with a mix of sadness and resolve. Expectations are powerful, David said thoughtfully. They shape how we see people before we even know them. But those expectations can also blind us. He paused, letting the moment sink in. It's easy to assume someone's place or role based on appearance, background, or even the color of their skin. But those assumptions limit us all. The branch manager finally looked up, meeting David's eyes with a flicker of honesty. You're right, Coleman said quietly. I realize now that my assumptions were unfair. They were based on ignorance more than anything else. David nodded approvingly. That's the first step, he said. Admitting where we've been wrong. He continued, but it's what we do next that counts. Coleman seemed to take those words deeply to heart. He straightened in his chair, as if ready to face a challenge he hadn't known was coming. David's calm presence had shifted the dynamic in the room. The staff, once frozen and anxious, began to relax, sensing that this conversation was about growth, not punishment. David glanced around the room and said, "We all carry biases. The important thing is recognizing them and choosing to act differently." He addressed the staff directly, making sure everyone heard him. This branch has potential. The talent is here. But respect and trust have to come first, from leaders to employees, and from employees to customers. The room was silent again, but the silence was different now, hopeful, expectant. Mr. Coleman took a deep breath and added, "I'm committed to making changes. Starting today." David smiled, a genuine warmth in his eyes. That's what leadership looks like. The tension that had gripped the room for so long began to dissolve. In that moment, it became clear that real change wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic speeches. It was about honesty, humility, and the courage to face uncomfortable truths. And that day, in the quiet lobby of Pinecrest National Bank, a new chapter was beginning. One where respect, understanding, and opportunity would no longer be just words, but actions. Elijah Grant tilted his head slightly, raising an eyebrow as he repeated the phrase that had just been uttered.
Someone like me.
The words lingered in the air, loaded with more meaning than Mr. Coleman probably intended. The entire room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what Elijah would say next. His gaze was calm but intense, inviting reflection rather than confrontation. There was no anger in his voice, just a quiet insistence on understanding. "Tell me, Mr. Coleman," Elijah said smoothly, "what exactly do you mean by someone like me?" The branch manager swallowed hard, suddenly aware that he had stumbled into deeper waters. He tried to respond, but the words felt awkward and hollow. I just meant," Coleman began, stumbling over his own hesitation, "that it's unusual to see a black man in your position. It's not what we're used to." Elijah's eyes narrowed slightly, but he maintained his composed demeanor. "That unusual mindset is exactly the problem," he said quietly. "It's the reason I waited 2 hours in your lobby. Because despite the suit, the business card, and the CEO title, you couldn't see past your assumptions." He paused, letting the silence do its work. Elijah's calm challenge was a mirror held up to the branch manager and everyone watching. The truth was clear: biases, often invisible but deeply ingrained, shaped how people were treated. Even in places that should champion fairness and professionalism, like a bank. Elijah continued, "When you say someone like me, you reveal the limits of your expectations. And those limits hurt more than just me, they hurt your entire branch, your team, and your customers." Coleman's face flushed with embarrassment, but he didn't interrupt. He was listening. And that was the first step. Elijah took a breath and softened his tone. "I'm not here to shame you or this branch," he explained. "I'm here because I believe in accountability, in respect, and in the idea that leadership means breaking barriers, not reinforcing them." The staff, who had been watching quietly, seemed to absorb his words. Their eyes were wide, faces thoughtful. Some nodded slowly, as if realizing things they hadn't before. Elijah scanned the room one last time and said, "We all have blind spots. We all carry biases, whether we admit them or not. But what matters is how we move forward." He turned his attention back to Coleman. "Will you join me in making this branch a place where everyone is seen for who they are, not what they look like?" Coleman swallowed and then nodded, slowly but sincerely. "Yes. I want to do better." "Good," Elijah said with a small smile. "Because change starts with acknowledgement." The moment was quiet but powerful. It wasn't just about a man waiting 2 hours. It wasn't just about a CEO confronting a branch manager. It was about breaking down invisible walls and opening doors for everyone. Elijah's raised eyebrow had been more than a gesture. It was a question.
A challenge.
And an invitation to rethink everything. Elijah's voice lowered, but the weight of his words filled the entire room. "You judged me based on what you saw," he said slowly, looking directly at Mr. Coleman. The branch manager's eyes flickered with discomfort, but Elijah wasn't finished. "But what you saw was only skin deep." A heavy silence settled over the lobby. The phrase hit hard, not just for Coleman, but for every employee standing there. It wasn't just about one man or one bank branch. It was about a truth many tried to ignore: the power of assumptions and how they close doors before anyone even gets a chance to walk through. Elijah stepped forward, his tone firm yet composed.
"You missed your opportunity."
The room seemed to hold its breath. Coleman shifted in his seat, visibly affected. "Your assumptions cost you," Elijah continued. "Not just 2 hours of waiting, but the chance to build a real relationship, to understand who I am and what I represent." He paused, scanning the faces of the employees. "You see, being a CEO isn't just about titles or suits," Elijah said. "It's about leadership, vision, and the ability to see beyond surface appearances." His words weren't accusations, they were a wake-up call. A reminder that judging someone by their skin color or first impression doesn't just hurt that person, it hurts everyone. It keeps people trapped in outdated ideas and missed chances. Elijah's gaze softened, but his message remained clear. "I'm not here to hold grudges. I'm here to open eyes. To challenge the way things have been done. To build a future where respect comes first." The branch manager swallowed hard, finally nodding in agreement. "Yes," Coleman said quietly.
"You're right."
"There's so much I didn't see." Elijah smiled gently. "That's okay. Recognizing it is the start." He turned to address the entire team. "We all have blind spots. But it's how we deal with them that defines us. The way forward is through respect. And through the courage to change." The staff exchanged glances, some relieved, some thoughtful. The tension that had gripped the room began to ease. Elijah's calm strength had shifted the energy. He wasn't just a CEO visiting a branch. He was a catalyst for something bigger. A movement toward fairness and dignity. And in that moment, Pinecrest National Bank was no longer just a building. It became a symbol of hope, of possibility, of a new way to do business, one where people were truly seen and valued. Elijah took a breath and said, "I want this branch to be a place where everyone feels respected. Where assumptions don't define us. And where opportunities are given based on merit, not bias." The employees nodded. Slowly but surely, the seeds of change were planted.
Because Sommet Team, il tac à moment like this. A powerful remindé.
That judging someone by what's on the surface isn't just wrong, it's a lost opportunity. After the intense conversation, Elijah reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. Without hesitation, he tapped a contact labeled Samantha, Assistant, and put the call on speaker. The entire lobby went silent, all eyes fixed on him. "Take notes," Elijah said clearly, his voice steady and commanding. "We'll be restructuring management at this branch." The staff exchanged surprised glances. This was no ordinary visit anymore. It was clear Elijah meant business and change. Samantha's voice came through the speaker, calm and efficient.
Ready, Elia.
Elijah turned to Mr. Coleman and the team. "First, we'll be reviewing current management practices. There's no room for assumptions or delays." He paused to let that sink in. "We want a bank where every customer is treated with respect, no exceptions. That means clear protocols, ongoing diversity training, and a culture shift that starts at the top." Coleman nodded slowly, visibly humbled. Elijah continued, "Second, we will be conducting employee evaluations based on merit and customer service. Those who show commitment to these values will thrive." The room held its breath as Elijah laid out the plan. He wasn't here just to criticize, he was here to fix what wasn't working. Samantha typed quickly, capturing every word. Elijah spoke again, "We'll also appoint a diversity officer to ensure accountability and progress." There was a murmur of approval from the employees, some nodding quietly. Elijah's phone buzzed with a message. He glanced down briefly but didn't break focus. "Now, I want a full audit of this branch's operations within the next 30 days, he said firmly. "We'll analyze customer feedback, employee satisfaction, and compliance with new standards." Coleman looked up, a mix of anxiety and relief in his eyes.
Monsieur Grant, y appreciate 10 opportunités.
"I want to work with you to make Pinecrest better." Elijah smiled, genuine but serious. "That's the attitude I want to see. Change takes work, but it's worth it." He turned back to the phone and said, "Samantha, arrange for the diversity training sessions to start next week." She responded promptly, "Will do." Elijah then addressed the staff, "I'm not here to punish anyone. I'm here to lead a transformation. This branch has potential, but it's been held back by outdated attitudes. From now on, we move forward with respect, fairness, and transparency." The employees began to relax, realizing this wasn't just a visit, it was the start of something new. Elijah ended the call, slipping the phone back into his pocket. He looked around the room, eyes meeting those of the staff. "We're all responsible for this change. I expect your cooperation." There was a newfound energy in the air, a sense that things were about to improve. For the first time in a long time, hope filled the lobby of Pinecrest National Bank. Elijah's quiet authority had sparked a movement, a chance to rebuild trust and create a workplace where everyone, regardless of background, could succeed. As Elijah prepared to leave the branch, Mr. Coleman approached him. "Thank you, Mr. Grant," he said sincerely. Elijah nodded. "Thank you for your honesty and willingness to change." With that, Elijah stepped out, leaving behind a branch ready to turn a new page. The moment Elijah ended his call and laid out the plan for restructuring management, a sudden sharp sound echoed through the lobby, a collective gasp. It came from every corner of the room, from the tellers behind their counters to the employees waiting anxiously by the doors. Their eyes darted between each other, faces pale with panic and disbelief. This wasn't just a polite visit anymore. It was a turning point. For some, the word restructuring sparked fear of job loss or demotion. For others, it was the terrifying prospect of having their daily behaviors, biases, and attitudes exposed under a new microscope. Most of all, it was the undeniable message that things were changing, whether they liked it or not. Mr. Coleman, the branch manager, looked like he'd seen a ghost. His usual slick confidence had drained away, replaced by an expression of stunned realization. He shuffled his papers nervously, unable to meet Elijah's calm gaze. The truth was, Coleman had felt untouchable for years. But now, that illusion was shattered. He realized the consequences of his earlier attitude toward Elijah. That 2-hour wait, the assumptions, the dismissive glare, all of it was about to be examined. No longer could he hide behind his position or past habits. The staff, too, were shaken. Some whispered quietly, exchanging nervous glances. Others stared at the floor, suddenly aware of how much they'd ignored or participated in the toxic culture. A few employees tried to mask their anxiety with forced smiles, but it didn't fool anyone. Elijah noticed the tension but remained composed. He understood the fear. Change is uncomfortable. But he also knew that real growth only happens when people face those fears head-on. He took a slow breath and said, "I know this feels overwhelming. But this isn't about punishment. It's about opportunity. An opportunity to build something better, for you, for the customers, and for this community." His voice was steady, filled with quiet conviction. Slowly, some staff members started to relax. They saw that Elijah wasn't there to tear them down. He was there to lift them up. He was challenging them, and the branch, to rise to a higher standard. Elijah's presence was a wake-up call. It exposed uncomfortable truths, but it also opened a door to hope. The silence began to break as people started asking questions. "What kind of changes are coming?" one teller asked hesitantly. "When will the training start?" another voice chimed in. Even Coleman found his voice, though it was quieter than usual. "We'll work through this," he said, surprising himself with the sincerity in his tone. "We'll do better." Elijah nodded approvingly. "Good."
This is just the beginning.
As the gasps faded, they were replaced by cautious optimism. The staff might have been scared at first, but now, a spark of determination was igniting. They realized that the old way, the assumptions, the silence, the disrespect, could no longer hold them back. And with Elijah's leadership, they had a real chance to change. For the first time that day, the lobby didn't feel heavy. It felt alive, ready for a new chapter. One where respect, fairness, and opportunity weren't just words, but the foundation of everything they did. After laying out the plan and addressing the tense silence that had fallen over the lobby, Elijah straightened his jacket and prepared to leave. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Every eye followed his movements. Mr. Coleman, still trying to process everything, cleared his throat. "Mr. Grant," he began, his voice hesitant but curious, "if I may ask, what brought you here today? Was this about a loan application or something similar?" Elijah turned slowly, a small knowing smile curling at the corner of his lips. He met Coleman's gaze directly and said, "No need for a loan, Mr. Coleman. I already own the building."
The warden in the air like a thunderclap.
The entire room froze. Staff gasped, their eyes wide with shock and disbelief. The branch manager's mouth opened slightly, as if trying to say something, but no words came out. Elijah's smile deepened, but it was calm, confident, yet without arrogance. "Yes," he continued, "Meridian Financial Group owns this bank, and I'm the CEO. That means, in a very real sense, this building and this branch are mine." He paused, letting the weight of his statement settle.
The silence was deafening.
Everyone suddenly realized that this visit wasn't just a surprise inspection. It was a clear signal that the old way of doing business at Pinecrest National Bank was over. Elijah's presence wasn't just symbolic, it was backed by real authority. Coleman finally found his voice, trying to mask the shock. I didn't know you would be coming here personally, Mr. Grant." Elijah nodded.
Many don't.
"But I believe leadership is about being present where it matters. Sometimes that means walking into your own branches, unannounced, to see the reality on the ground." He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of every employee. This branch is part of a bigger family, and that family deserves better.
Better respect. Better service.
Better leadership. Elijah's words weren't just promises, they were commitments. And they made it clear that the days of dismissiveness and biased assumptions were numbered. The staff, still absorbing the shock, began to feel a shift. They weren't just employees now, they were part of a team under a CEO who cared, who demanded accountability and fairness. Coleman swallowed hard, a mix of fear and hope in his expression. Elijah's next words were direct. "I'm here to ensure this branch operates with integrity. To make sure every customer feels valued. And to build an environment where employees are respected and empowered." Elijah extended his hand. "I hope you're ready to be part of that change." Coleman hesitated, then shook Elijah's hand firmly.
Yes, Monsieur Grant.
The staff watched the exchange, sensing the end of an era and the start of a new one. As Elijah turned to leave, he glanced back once more. Remember, he said, voice steady, I'm not just the CEO on paper.
I'm the one holding this branch accountable.
And I expect nothing less than your best. With that, he walked out the door, leaving behind a lobby filled with stunned silence and renewed determination. That day, Pinecrest National Bank didn't just get a surprise visit. It got a wake-up call. A message that respect, fairness, and leadership start from the very top, and that change, when it comes, is unstoppable. Just as Elijah reached the door, ready to step back into the busy street, he paused.
The sounds of the bank, the soft hum of computer, the rustle of papers, the nervous whisper, fait le effort à brief moment.
All eyes were still fixed on him. Slowly, he turned around and faced the room once more. His gaze swept over the employees, the tellers, and finally landed on Mr. Coleman, the branch manager who had so recently dismissed him without a second thought. The silence was heavy, expectant. Then, with calm authority, Elijah spoke words that would linger long after he left. Next time, he said, voice steady and clear, treat every person who walks in with respect, regardless of what you think they're here for. It wasn't just a gentle reminder. It was a powerful command, a call to action. He wasn't simply asking for politeness or professionalism. He was demanding a change in mindset, a fundamental shift in how people saw each other. Because, as Elijah knew all too well, judgments made on appearances or assumptions could hurt more than just one person. They could damage an entire community's trust. He paused, letting his message sink in. You don't get to decide someone's story by the way they look, or the watch on their wrist, or the color of their skin. These assumptions create walls where there should be bridges. Elijah's words echoed around the lobby, filling the space with undeniable truth. He glanced at Coleman again. You lost sight of that. But today, you have a chance to make it right. The staff nodded quietly, some with relief, others with a new sense of purpose. Elijah's presence had shaken them out of complacency, forcing a confrontation with uncomfortable realities. He wasn't here to punish. He was here to inspire change. And sometimes, that starts with just one statement.
One challenge.
One moment that refuses to be forgotten. He added, respect isn't just about good manners, it's about dignity. About recognizing the humanity in every person, no matter who they are or where they come from. For this bank to succeed, that has to be the foundation. He smiled softly, a brief warmth breaking through the firm tone. Because when we respect each other, we open the door to possibilities. Opportunities for growth, for collaboration, for success. Elijah looked around the room one last time. He saw faces touched by hope, eyes filled with the weight of responsibility. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Change rarely is. But he was confident this was the beginning of something better. Remember, he said, how you treat people today shapes who you become tomorrow. With that, Elijah stepped through the door. The lobby remained silent for a moment, then slowly, the staff began to exhale, a sense of release and resolve filling the room. Mr. Coleman remained rooted in place, contemplating the weight of Elijah's words. For him, and for everyone at Pinecrest National, this was no longer just about banking. It was about rebuilding trust, mending wounds, and creating a community where respect wasn't optional. As the door closed behind Elijah, the employees looked at one another with a newfound determination. They had been called to a higher standard. And for the first time, they truly understood what that meant. The door clicked shut behind Elijah Grant, sealing the moment with finality. But inside Pinecrest National Bank, the echoes of his visit were only beginning to ripple through every corner, every desk, and every heart. This wasn't just an ordinary day, and this wasn't just an ordinary audit. No, this was a wake-up call. A challenge thrown down by a man who owned more than just the building. He owned the vision for what this bank could become. As the lobby emptied out and the clock ticked forward, something had already changed. The air no longer felt heavy with indifference or quiet judgment. Instead, it buzzed faintly with a new energy, the energy of possibility. For weeks after Elijah's visit, whispers of that day turned into conversations. Conversations became meetings. Meetings sparked training sessions, workshops, and honest talks about respect, fairness, and the culture they wanted to build. The staff began to see themselves not just as employees, but as the guardians of a community's trust. They realized every customer who walked in deserved dignity and attention, no exceptions. Mr. Coleman, once so sure of his authority, found himself humbled. He embraced the chance to learn, to grow, and to lead with a renewed sense of purpose. He worked closely with Elijah's team to implement changes that went beyond surface fixes. It was about transforming the heart of Pinecrest National Bank. One teller shared how she started greeting every customer with genuine warmth, noticing how a simple smile changed the atmosphere. Another employee recounted how Elijah's words inspired her to challenge her own biases and assumptions. Even the quietest voices found courage to speak up when they saw unfairness or disrespect. The community took notice, too. More people began trusting the bank again, knowing that real leadership had taken root. Elijah's visit became a story told not just inside the walls of the bank, but in the neighborhood and beyond, a story about courage, accountability, and change. For Elijah, the visit was just part of his mission. He understood that leadership wasn't about titles or power, it was about responsibility. And responsibility meant showing up, listening, and holding people accountable when they fell short. The lesson from that day stayed with everyone who was there. It was a reminder that respect must be earned and given freely, that assumptions can blind us to the truth, and that change starts with one person willing to stand up. As Pinecrest National Bank moved forward, it wasn't just a place for transactions. It became a place where people felt seen, heard, and valued. Where the past's mistakes were lessons, not chains. Where every handshake carried the weight of trust rebuilt. And somewhere in the background, Elijah watched, not from a distance, but as a leader who understood that true change is a journey, not a single event. The door that closed behind him that day was not a door of separation, but a door to a new chapter. A chapter defined by respect, integrity, and the belief that every person deserves to be treated with dignity. And that chapter? It was just beginning. That day at Pinecrest National Bank wasn't just about one man's wait. It was a wake-up call that changed everything, from how a bank treats its customers to how respect should never be based on appearances. Elijah's visit reminds us all, true leadership is about dignity, fairness, and standing up for what's right. If you enjoyed this story, hit like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories that inspire and empower. Thanks for watching, and remember, respect starts with you.